it's phenomenal to see the action that someone, as I always say, if someone's dead, there's no action. But when someone's alive, we see changes in blood flow. We see changes in oxygen. We see changes in the energy frequencies. So the mind is showing up in the brain, and the brain is responding. So what you're picking up with technology is simply the response of the brain. So it's not that you have a broken brain if you're battling with mental issues. Is that if you have an adverse circumstance, you experience it with your mind, it shows up in your brain, because we use our brain to be able to actually store that experience in a way that we can then speak about it and experience it. So we need our brain and our body for our mind to work through. But a brain and a body need the mind for it to actually do anything. So if you look at our psychoneurobiology, so I study psychoneurobiology, mind, brain, body connection, as opposed to just mind, body connection or mind, brain connection, mind, brain, body. So when we talk about the non-conscious mind, hang on, there were 3 questions. The first thing is that you're not a broken brain, because when you have an adverse circumstance, that experience is processed through your mind into your brain, and then it changes the brain. The brain responds on a structural level because of the genetic changes that will happen, because of the energy frequencies that it stimulates. So the simplest way, then I'll come into what the QEEG is. I'm going to show you 2 trees. Okay, so here's a little healthy green tree.
Oh, y'all should see this. It's a real tree she's holding up.
And that's what thoughts look like. So when we talk about the brain changing and experiences growing in the brain, I'm talking about you growing trees. As you're listening to me now, our mind, our ability to think and feel and choose, which is also an energy force around us and through us. When someone dies, they weigh less because that energy actually goes. So that energy force is through us, giving the brain life. So that force on a psychological level is thinking, feeling, and choosing. And that's what you're using to process what I'm saying. You're thinking, feeling, and choosing at 400 billion actions plus a second.
Now, can you say that again? Because that's another astounding fact in the book.
Right, it's actually more. It's about 400 billion actions per second. It's more close. It's
incredible.
To 10 to the 27, which is just an unfathomable number. So I always say 400 billion. But what we're doing at the moment, all of us, is we are thinking, feeling, and choosing at these speeds and these cycles, taking the stuff that we're saying, making sense of it, and it's all energy, pushing it into the brain. The brain is then responding on an electrical, electromagnetic, neurochemical, and genetic level. And when it does all that, it makes stuff. And the stuff it makes are proteins. And the proteins hold our words as vibrations. And the more words we say, the more proteins grow and the more branches grow. So these branches are holding the data of what we're saying. So these branches are memories. And the interesting thing about this thought is that it's got, like a tree's got a root and you've got branches. What we're saying is in the roots, because that's the source, and your interpretation, because we all have our own unique perception, our own unique way.
You say the roots are actually the non-conscious mind, right?
No, the roots, there's all in the non-conscious and conscious. So it's all in.
Okay.
So just think of the structure first, and I'll explain the non-conscious. So think of the structure first. This is happening. The non-conscious works 24/7. So our non-conscious mind is working 24/7. At the moment, our conscious mind is working with the non-conscious mind together. And together, they are taking this information I'm saying, pushing it in the brain, and this whole thing is happening. And the first, the roots grow, which is the words that we're saying. And then the interpretation, how you understand this, grows simultaneously based on the other experiences. So we are converting at very high speeds what we experience, what we hear, say, read, etc., into our brain with our minds, with our non-conscious working with our conscious, into the brain, and that causes a reaction, and there's a product that results. And that product is a tree, and that tree is a thought, and the thought is made of branches.
And I thought this was so interesting too, that you say that those thoughts, those physical things, that energy is found in the brain, it's found in the non-conscious, and it's found at a cellular level. Exactly. And that's why it's so literally that, and here's another quote, trauma literally makes you sick. I mean,
that's exactly the point. You're quite right there. Sorry, you were saying something?
No, I was just, I thought that helps. I've read some about that, about the enteric nervous system and all that, and that kind of thing. And I've been trying to educate myself about the gut and the mind's interaction. But this explanation of cellular memory and cellular thoughts, or thoughts stored in the cells, just made so much sense to me, because I see that every day with trauma. I see people physically ill from what they're remembering.
Absolutely. And that's because what they've gone through isn't a nice green tree. What they've gone through is a toxic change in their brain. Right. So there's a toxic tree. So the root system would be the experience of the abuse, whatever the trauma is, and whether it's very complex, whether it's very long established, been a long time, whatever. Trauma comes in, anything that's adverse is trauma, as we know, and trauma ranges on a scale of severity, but it looks different in the brain. So it's also an experience, also processed by the mind, also goes into the brain, causes the same reaction, proteins build and hold the data. But the origin is the root, is the origin story. That's the roots of the tree. So there's all the data. That's what happened. That's all the toxic trauma. This is the distorted processing as you're having the trauma. And this is your interpretation of what you had, of what happened to you. And that shows, that's built into your brain. It's all distorted proteins, distorted chemicals. So that creates your brain doesn't align with your brain function. And as soon as that happens, not only is it built in the brain, and now we come to the body stuff, but it's also built into the body in a change in our cells. So it's mind to brain to body. And so mind takes it first, and it's like a wave in the brain, like a whole pattern of toxicity in the brain, in the mind. In the brain, it's a tree, a physical tree made of proteins, with a root system, which is the origin story, and the branches, which is the interpretation. And then in the body, the memory is in the change in the genes of every cell. And you have 37 to 100 trillion cells. So that's why it goes, and that's why things like EMDR, what they're doing is it's pulling out.
Exactly what I was thinking about. This is EMDR.
It's pulling out from the genes into the data. The brain will bring the data. The mind puts the three together. So the body brings up the physical feeling. The brain then connects that with the data, provides the data, which is literally the emotions, what happened, the interpretation, and then the mind puts it all together, and we feel it as this holistic experience. So we have to use our mind to almost pull that apart. I'm feeling this in my body. I'm feeling this. These are the details. And so you kind of can pull the whole thing apart with your mind to fix it up. So when we talk about trauma, this is creating a toxic response in the brain, because the proteins don't fold nicely. This one, the proteins are folding nicely. The roots of this are good. The branches are good. This is a happy memory. This is trauma, and this is terrible. This has created a complete brain damage. And the immune system says, hey, that's threatening survival. So the immune system sends out T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes, and we get inflammation, and our homocysteine levels go up and cortisol levels go up. And then on the level of in our body, in our cells, we're going to have a change, for example, in our telomeres. I looked at telomeres in my research, which are the ends of chromosomes, and they're a proxy for how we're managing our mind and our mental health. So if we've got trauma, our telomeres will not be, and undealt with trauma, it will affect our telomeres, which will affect the cells of our body, which make up the organs and the systems. So if it's not like overnight, it's cumulative. So if we cumulatively don't deal with our trauma, that then increases the vulnerability of the entire brain and body to illness by 35 to 98%. So this has to be dealt with. And you can't just chop the head off. Like, if you go into a garden of weeds, you can't just chop the head off. The weeds will grow back. You have to actually read the signals that this is telling you, and go from the signal to the interpretation to the processing to the root, and deconstruct and reconstruct. And that takes time.